Welcome to Booked, the bookstore education podcast brought to you by the American Booksellers Association. This episode is part of our Indies Introduced series where we spotlight debut authors handpicked by booksellers from around the country. In each episode, a bookseller from the Indies Introduced panel will interview the author of a debut title featured in our program.
Hello, my name is Laurie Gillman. I am from East City Bookshop in Washington, D.C. in the Capitol Hill neighborhood, and I'm interviewing an Indies Introduced author today, Laura Venita Green. Laura Venita Green is a writer and translator with an MFA from Columbia University, where she was an undergraduate teaching fellow. Her fiction won the Story Foundation Prize and appears in Story, Joyland, The Missouri Review, and Fatal Flaw. Raised in rural Louisiana, Laura now lives with her husband in New York City. Sister Creatures is her first novel. And before we get started with our conversation, I just want to say that in the process of choosing books for the Indies Introduced panel, it goes on for a few months, and obviously you read a whole lot. And I was reading your book in manuscript form at really probably the last week of the process. And I will admit, never can there be too much to read, but there is a point where you're like, okay, now I'm just getting through all these. I'm going. And when I got to Sister Creatures, I was kind of in that mode. And then I just thought, oh, wait a second. This is the book I've been wanting to read. This is grabbing me. And so with that one, I felt like I kind of slipped into a different mode, and it really, obviously, it just stuck with me. I've been talking about it since then, and wanted to do this interview. So that's the kind of book it is. And I know we don't want to do spoilers and things. If there are booksellers listening, you really should read it. So I don't want to spoil, but I should say it's a story. It's a novel that is interconnected stories, really interconnected characters who have different but connected stories. So my first question for you is, was there one character that came to you first that really inspired the rest of the characters, or was it like all these people were trying to get out? How did it come about?
Oh, thanks so much, Laurie. I've really been looking forward to this conversation with you. So my protagonist who starts out the book is Tess, and it took finding her and her voice for me to feel that this could be a book-length project. But before she came, she wasn't the first one that showed up. So I have these four women from the same small town in Louisiana and this supernatural entity that looms over their lives. And I had, so that's five characters. I had an individual point or a story for each one of those characters. So I had Gail living in New York City, Olivia falling for her older coworker, Lainey struggling with her little sister, and then the shapeshifter in the woods in Louisiana, who could never kind of be satisfied with what she already had. And Tess showed up last, and once I had her, she was actually about to move with her family to Germany when I found her. Once I had her voice, her attitude, her judgment on the world, her sense of humor, and just her flaws and her humanity, I felt that I could make a whole book out of this, and then it was just my job to understand how are these people related? What does their story look like? Because I know it's connected. I just don't know how yet.
Oh, fascinating. And I have to say that Tess, I mean, all the characters, obviously, as you said, very different. They have their personalities, their strengths, but Tess is she's the glue. And I also grew up in a small town in West
Mm.
Texas. And that she just, it was spot on for sort of her attitude, her outlook, her struggles. I loved her and every choice she made, good or bad. She was a wonderful character. So it's fascinating that she came up and that she came up about to move to Germany because like the early, how did that early part of her life kind of get filled in? Did it?
Tessa's great. I mean, sometimes you want to shake her, and
Yeah.
I do think like the novel is helped by looking away from her at times, so you don't get overly frustrated with her. But once I had these characters and I knew they were related, and Tess, even though we started when she was moving to Germany, was always from this place in Louisiana. And that's true. Only the first third of the book takes place in Louisiana, but all of these characters are informed by having come from this place. So even when I wrote her later in life, not living there, she was from there. And so I just thought, okay, I'm going to put Tess, Gail, and Thea, who shows up. So Thea's this entity. She shows up through many forms throughout the book and starts out in the form of a creepy doll. Um, and I just put them in the same
Great.
room and let them do their thing. I had no plan for it. And then once you do that, you find out the beginning of the book, which I wrote about halfway through the writing process. Then you can go back to their later life points because you have a lot more information. And then it's this reiterative process of just learning more and going back and forth. And I thought that worked really well for this book. But it just was putting them in the same room and letting them do their thing.
It really did work well. Yeah. And that sort of following up on that idea of this town, I know people always want to say, how is this autobiographical? But I do have to ask, as a fellow small town person, I feel like that does give you a very particular lens on the world, and maybe especially in the southern part of the US. And so how do you think I mean, do you think that's true? And do you think that that has anything to do with the way the book turns out or a particular effect on that?
Yeah, so I was a army brat growing up who lived in Germany for my 6 of my first 8 years of life. But then from age 8 to 18, I ended up in rural Louisiana in this town of about 1,200 people, very conservative Bible Belt area where everyone knows everyone else's business and everyone's just as intelligent as anywhere else, but there aren't necessarily a lot of opportunities for cultural or education.
Right.
Um, and even when these characters are not there, they are just so affected by this place they came from. And there's this whole sense in this book that home shapes you so much, and then once you leave, you really can't return. Even if you physically go back, there's no way to really return. But what was great, it's interesting because after moving from Louisiana, I lived in Austin for 18 years, and I've lived now in New York City since 2019, and my imagination always goes back to rural Louisiana where I grew up. Um, it was also very helpful to kind of touch that setting through a few different characters' lenses. Because, for instance, you've got Tess at the beginning already feeling at age 20 that her life is imploded. Luckily, it hasn't. She has a journey from there, but that's how she feels then. And she senses kind of just the humidity, the oppressiveness, the bugs swarming around, the trees that got felled in this backyard where she is. But on the other hand, you have Lainey, who loves the place, has all her fond memories from there, and appreciates just the beauty and this her ability to kind of live in nature. And then you have Olivia, who is this ambitious high school senior already on her way out, and she's just dismissive. Like
Yes.
she's not noticing anything that she's just anything but dismissive about.
Yes. Yes. I was thinking about election, with that character because there are plenty of those in small towns waiting to get out, and then that feeling of that it's just really hard to hard to leave, hard to find a way to leave if that's what you want. So I appreciate that. And this is, well, not entirely related, but I was also curious about how your work as and training as a translator affected, any of, not even just the characters, but the way you structure things, the way you think about things, if that has an effect that you notice on your work.
It has had such an effect. And so I was writing a lot of this book, started out at least when I was in my MFA program at Columbia. And at Columbia, if you take 15 of your 60 credit hours in translation, you can have kind of a dual degree in fiction and translation. And so I was reading just widely in translation and practicing translating from Italian, which is not a language I know well. I just decided to start teaching myself because I didn't want to be someone who only knew one language their entire lives.
I wondered about that. Okay. Yeah.
And and so yes, that has affected this book so much. On one hand, it's just understanding that there are infinite ways to tell the same story. Translation, kind of you're reading so many books and you're seeing all these kind of non-obvious ways, or non-obvious to the American reader, ways to tell these stories, but also it makes you slow down and just think about your sentence level work. And that's not naturally what my mode is as a writer. I'm so invested in the characters and kind of the action that's taking place. And only after the fact I can think, okay, how can I actually structure this sentence? What's the word choice here? So that's the kind of obvious ways it has affected this book. But beyond that, I have this I'm sort of obsessed with translation and Italian and the fact that I don't still know how to speak it, even though I've been studying for about 7 years. And I did give that to Tess with German. So she meets someone very early on, Gail, who speaks German and writes her this German note. And kind of it kicks off, it doesn't take fire right away, but kicks off this love of German and this interest in it. And I think she similarly feels, sheepish about the fact that she can't quite get there with the language, but she's always studying it.
Yes. And I think that, I can identify with that as well. I'm sure there are others out there. Um, so I, I read it, as I said, as a bound manuscript. So the whole idea of it, because in just sort of looking at reviews and things coming out there, people always mention it's sort of these interconnected stories. And my experience of it felt really different than that. I mean, I get it, but I just felt like I'm reading a novel, which so the format, of course, makes a difference. But do you did you picture it being structured as sort of interconnected stories from the beginning?
There was a lot of time. So I took about 4 years to write this book and then another 2 years to get it out into the world. And when I was querying, I actually queried it as a novel in 13 stories. And yeah, so I have such kind of a pattern making or puzzle piece sort of brain. So as I mentioned, I had these 5 individual stories, and then I started creating the book around that. But I also then just had to let it happen from there. I didn't have kind of a plan. So I did originally think that it was a novel in stories, and I think it is, but there's this spectrum of story collection to novels that, completely unconnected, or this traditional chronologic, one character sort of sweeping arc. And I think this book kind of falls just on the novel side of that, at least for me. And part of it is just I 100% need a reader to read this from page 1 to page 240. And if it's the type of book where if a reader comes into it ready to participate, I think it does read more as a novel. It's that type of book where you get to a point and then you have to flip back a few chapters and say, oh, I've already seen that. That has new meaning now. Oh, I didn't realize that was going to be important. So it's just one of those books that you need to participate in, I think, to get kind of the full effect of it. And then my editor at Unnamed Press, Chris Heiser, who has been great, really did help me shape this along the way more towards a novel, getting rid of some of the extra characters in the last part and just making sure the connections that I already had in there but were unburied a little bit. So it was a whole process, but I really do think at this point that this book is a novel.
Yeah, that's interesting. And yeah, that is definitely how I experienced, and part of the pleasure was that kind of going back, like going, wait, I think I've seen this before, and then going back to it. And it is kind of, I guess for marketing purposes and booksellers, we have to categorize things so we can tell people in a very, brief language what this is, what to expect. Um, so without giving anything away, we talked a little bit about the characters, but do you have well, I have to ask if you have a favorite character or one that just sort of you kind of felt like your guiding light in there. And if there were any that were particularly, knowingly or maybe after the fact, you realized they were sort of inspired by a myth or a folk tale or anything like that.
I think this book does come across as a little, like it is inspired by folk tales or by myths. Um, Really, I just kind of start with a character, let kind of odd or strange things happen, and then figure out my best way to make it fit in the book. So, some of the more dramatic characters are Gail and Thea. So Thea's this entity. But Gail, I had her just living in New York City, and I just kind of let her meet her doppelganger and have a very odd conversation with her doppelganger. And really that is what informed her entire story. I had no plan. I just learned a lot about her from that odd conversation, and then just let her story be what it was, and it was my job to make it work in a book. So that's how Gail got kicked off. And then with Thea, same situation. I wanted the shapeshifter in the woods to work in this book, and I thought, how can I do that? And I do think like the reader really needs to decide how they want to read Thea. But initially, I thought, okay, Tess is going to meet this character, Thea, and then imagine these scenarios for her. But of course, anytime you create a character, she becomes way bigger than you ever planned. And that was certainly what happened in Tess's case as well. But it really, none of these characters were based off of anything in particular, other than just allowing myself to kind of get strange with it.
Oh, I love that because it is like this world that is sort of interconnected by a feeling of, folktale and mythology and things happening out there that you can't really see, which I think, of course, is a lot of it is due to Thea. And I was completely enjoying reading Thea as this sort of interconnective tissue of what all these women want. And it just, kind of, I don't know, it made it feel like the story went way back and way forward to me. So I really enjoyed that. And I think that I just kept thinking, this must have been really hard. This must have been really hard to do.
Part of it was just not holding too much control. It was that was the hardest part, is just she is wanting to be so much more than my plan for this book, and somehow I need to allow that to happen. So that part was hard.
And yeah, and I mean, how do you do that? Like, do you just have to spend a lot of time kind of wrestling with this character?
Yes, it's a lot of time, a lot of revision, and I think this plays out a little bit in the book, this butting heads between Tess and Thea, because Thea is not cooperating with her. And that's how I feel for really any character I write. It's like, oh, I have this plan for you. You are not following this plan. And ultimately, I always lose that battle. But in these early drafts, I feel that battle every single time.
Oh, that's fascinating. I'm just sitting here thinking, wow, that sounds like being a parent. So, guess there are
Yes.
a lot of similarities there.
Yeah. And a lot of mother-daughter dynamics came through, especially in the last third of this book. And I
Yeah.
absolutely made that connection. Having this character, having this book really does feel like having a child out in the world to me, which is hilarious, but it's true.
Well, yeah, I mean, I totally get that. And I would imagine you feel a little protective and a little worried of, how they're going to be, how
I
they're going to
know.
do out there and take care of
Yeah.
themselves.
Mhm.
Well, uh, I really hope that everybody listening will read this book. And I'm going to move a little bit away from the story and the creating to just the experience that you had as a debut novelist. As booksellers, we do spend a lot of time. I mean, we're doing our own marketing, but we also spend time talking about the world of publishing and how books are marketed and how that's going to affect what we sell, or what we purchase for our inventory and how we're going to approach it. So you've gotten lots of great reviews. The Indie Next pick or Indie's Introduce pick, excuse me. What was your experience like, and do you have particular advice for other debut novelists?
My, I think primary advice is just publishing is pretty opaque. Even debut novelists who work in publishing don't seem to feel that they are more in the know than
Oh,
other authors.
interesting. Okay.
And so then there's just this sense of having to jump in, say yes, and learn as you go. I was so excited to get a book deal, but the first few months, I was kind of living in the state of anxiety because I'm someone who likes to know as much as possible while I dive into something, and that I just had to figure out that that probably wasn't going to happen. I was only going to be able to do it and just learn as I go. The biggest thing to me is just finding community. So for I applied to this Poets and Writers Get the Word Out publicity incubator and got to work with 9 other debut authors and a publicity mentor. And we're still in touch, but it was a 12-week weekly program, and we learned a lot, but also just we have each other's backs for our debuts. It's just really supportive. Same with my small press is has 3 debuts coming out in the fall. We're about to have an event at Books or Magic together. So we're kind of working with each other. So it's imperative to just find other debut authors. Also, go support other books and events all year. It's easy for me in New York City. There's so many choices. I've been to a couple of events a week all year long, but really, even if your option is online events, attend those and then follow up with the author. An author is always happy to hear from you. So I've been meeting authors all year, supporting books, which means that they are now supporting my book and it's paying off. Also, just think of publicity as the opportunity to tell people about the art you made. It is not going to land in front of them if you are not helping it along the way. And finally, this Indies Introduced program has just been huge. Right now, I'm seeing my book in all of these bookstores, and that is just the dream. I mean, it is a dream come true. So I've also been into my local bookstores, just trying to develop relationship with booksellers. So my local West Village, New York bookstore, Three Lives, now has my book. But when I was writing reading lists for these publications, I'd go in and say, what are your thoughts about books on this theme? So I kind of just building kind of relationships throughout the year is my biggest piece of advice.
Oh, I love that. So you would say, just because I have a feeling people are hesitant, reach out to the author. Just go for broke, reach out to people, and the worst someone can do is say, I don't really have time to do this right now. Or
Absolutely. And it's true. I mean, so much of this writing life is rejection, and 100% of people you reach out to will not be receptive, but the vast majority are. And everyone wants to know that you have a book coming out or what your writing journey is. And so absolutely reach out. And if you don't hear back, move on.
That's great advice. And it's not, and it really, I mean, community and support from your community is always something we're talking about at the bookstore. And it seems like authors also, I mean, writing groups, there are so many ways it seems to me that authors connect. And so it makes sense that as you're going through this part of the process, publicity, that you would also need ways to connect and form community. So thank you for that advice. And I think that we have reached about the end of our conversation. I want to thank you, Laura, again for being here. It was so wonderful talking to you. I'm thrilled that I got to speak with you. And Laura Venita Green, the novel is Sister Creatures, and it is available at your local independent bookstores.
Thanks so much, Laurie.
Thank you, Laura.
Thank you for listening to Booked, the bookstore education podcast brought to you by the American Booksellers Association. Don't forget to subscribe to the show on your favorite podcast app. Additional educational resources can always be found on the ABA site at www.bookweb.org. Happy reading!